Well, we've got people coming in now. So y'all did not walk in on a party already in progress. The party has not yet begun. We would not begin the party without an audience. I want to welcome everybody to another edition of SIBA's Reader Meet Writer. I am your host, Wiley Cash. I am the writer in residence at the University of North Carolina, Asheville, and I'm a novelist. And my new novel, When Ghosts Come Home, comes out September 21st. And I am here as your host of SIBA's Reader Meet Writer. SIBA is an organization. It's the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance, and it represents just under 700 independently owned bookstores across the Southeast. And perhaps you found out about Gina's wonderful book from one of these independent booksellers, and I would encourage you to purchase her wonderful book from one of those independent booksellers. They are the lifeblood of our literary communities, and they need our support now like never before. And one way that you're supporting bookstores and writers is by attending events like these. You all have been so supportive of these events. And normally, Gina would be riding around in a limousine, staying at 5-star hotels on book tour like the rest of us do, just eating steak and sushi and just having money shower down on her. That's what life is like for authors on the road. But instead, we can't do that, so we're bringing these events to you. So please stick with us, support these events. And I want to let you know about 2 events we have coming up. We'll be hosting Mary Lawson to discuss her new novel, A Town Called Solace, at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, March 30th. 2 days later, we'll be hosting Denny S. Bryce to discuss her novel, Wild Women and the Blues, Thursday, April 1st at 7 p.m. So tonight we're going to see a slideshow from Gina Wilkinson about her new novel. During the slideshow, if you have any questions at any time, go to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type your question for Gina in there. Make sure to mention your name and the name of your home independent bookstore, or at least your favorite independent bookstore. And then I will ask Gina your question at the end of our broadcast. So when your question comes up, type it in so you don't forget it. So tonight we are very excited to welcome author Gina Wilkinson. She's a former foreign correspondent. She's an award-winning journalist and a documentary maker who's reported from some of the world's most intriguing and perilous places for the BBC, for NPR, ABC, and other renowned public broadcasters. She's originally from Australia. She spent 2 decades reporting from hotspots across the globe, and she is actually joining us from Australia. Gina, I want to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you, Wiley, for that lovely introduction. Thank you so much. And, I wish I had known about the limousines, the steak and the sushi. I thought it was bicycles and 2-minute noodles, but hey, there's always next time.
Tons of McDonald's and smoky rental cars. That's my tour.
I've got to get in on this. Next book. Anyway, as Wiley mentioned, I have put together a little PowerPoint presentation. I thought that would be something to look at rather than just this for the next 15 minutes or so. And it's going to show you a little bit about the background to the novel. So I'm just going to call that up on screen now. And can you all see that? I believe you can. Yes, I'm getting the thumbs up sign. Okay, so I have titled this Secrets, Spies, and Friendship, Fact Meets Fiction, Iraq's Amazing Art Scene, and a Book Market to Blow Your Mind. So those are some of the topics that we're going to be discussing. And as Wiley mentioned, I am coming to you from Australia. A few things to know about me. I grew up in a variety of very small towns in Western Australia. Over here, my family moved around every couple of years, so I was really had a very sort of nomadic lifestyle as a child, and that continued on into my life as an adult. You can see here some of the places where I've lived over the last 20 years. This is a photo of me at the airport in Basra. I've got to tell you, I did not normally go around kitted up like this, but it's actually one of the very few photos that I have of myself in Baghdad for a couple of reasons. One of them being that this is the pre-selfie era, and also I'm not really a selfie girl, and I was a radio reporter. So it was all about the sound, not really about the pictures, but there you go, there I am. And you can see up here, I've also spent a fair amount of time in North America. I met my husband in Vancouver, and later on we lived in New York, and my oldest son was actually born there. And more recently, I spent about 6 years living in Washington, DC. So I have quite a strong connection to the United States, which makes me doubly glad to be here with you today, meeting up with my American friends. So right now I live in on the East Coast with my husband, my kids, and Obi-Wan, my hairless cat. He is a lover of the fine things in life. You can see here, he likes wine, he likes flowers. He hails from Delaware. So that's my family, my Canadian husband, me, our 2 kids, and Obi. So we've got quite the spread of nationalities there. So that's it for me. I'll just throw in the obligatory cat photo. I figured the intersection between cat lovers and book lovers is fairly good. So I'll move on now to a bit about the book. All right. So first, let me go back to 2002, early 2002. I was actually living in Bangkok at that time. I was working there as a journalist, and my husband had followed me around the world from Canada to Australia, and then Australia to Thailand with my work. And he was actually offered a job working for the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, in Baghdad. He had followed me around a lot, and I was ready for a change. And the only complicating factor was that Saddam Hussein did not allow foreign journalists to live in Baghdad, but I was still intrigued by the idea of going there. It's a country that has been, at the center of momentous historical events for millennia in the ancient past and the modern history. And so for a journalist to be able to get into a country that was virtually sealed off from the outside world, that was an intriguing sort of idea for me. And also at the time, it was expected, this was going to sound a bit strange, but it was expected to be a very quiet posting. This is just before George Bush made his very well-known axis of evil speech. And so it was expected to be a quiet posting in that Saddam Hussein had such a tight grip on the country. You couldn't fly in and out. There were no trains in and out. There were very few foreigners. There was no, overseas TV, very limited opportunities to go out. So it was expected to be very quiet. But pretty much as we crossed the border, George Bush delivered that axis of evil speech, and it soon became apparent that it was going to be quite a volatile situation. And very soon after I arrived in Baghdad, I was befriended by a local woman. And I later discovered that she was actually an informant for the regime's secret police. And she was basically keeping them up to date on where I went, who I met with, and what I did. And here we go. Oh, hang on. One moment. I've gone back in time. Yeah, she was, all right. Let's start this again. All right. Sorry, everyone. Oh, this show must go on. Here we go. Right. Sorry. So I met this Iraqi lady. She was an informant for the secret police. And I want to say that, I don't blame her at all for that. In Iraq at that time, if the secret police wanted you to do something, I don't feel that she could really have said no, especially not for someone like her who came from a fairly humble background, and she had a family and friends to protect. So when I started writing this book, it was almost 10, 15 years later, I was still thinking about this relationship and were we actually friends, or was it just a job for her or an unpleasant duty that she had to fulfill? And so the very first scene of the book starts at the home of an Iraqi secretary. She's working for a foreign embassy. She's home alone, and the secret police arrive at her door, telling her that she has to befriend her boss's wife in order to try and find out information and feed it back to them. And if she doesn't, they're going to conscript her teenage son into a militia run by Uday Hussein, who was Saddam Hussein's son. So that is sort of the starting point of the novel. It was inspired by that real relationship. But the story that follows is fiction. But I created this character so I could really explore the issues of what is friendship, and especially what do people do when they're placed in extreme circumstances, when they're under extreme pressure, especially when what they have to do goes against their own morals and their own beliefs. Do they give in? Do they resist? How do they resist? How do they negotiate that situation? Where do they draw the line? So those were the issues that I wanted to get into through the character of Huda, the secretary. Now, there's also another Iraqi woman who appears quite frequently in the book, and she is an old childhood friend of Huda, and they have become estranged. And this gave me a way to look at one of the different sides of life to Iraq that many people probably aren't aware of in the West, especially if your information about Iraq is probably based on what you saw on your TV screen during the Iraq War or read in the newspaper. But for me personally, one of the great surprises when I moved to Baghdad was finding out that they had more than 24 independent art galleries operating in the city. And here I can show you some of the pictures of artists' work who were operating there at this time. And this is Amr El-Obaidi, Ismail Kayat. These works are by Lubna Musa. She has done a collage here, you can see, and this is a work of acrylic on canvas. This is a painting by Widad Orfali. She was a real trailblazing female artist in Iraq and gallery owner. And this is a work by Ismail Fatah, who unfortunately is no longer with us. These are the sort of works that I liked, but you could find any sort of art in Baghdad. It's been, it has a really lively art scene. It has modern people working, in sculpture, in watercolor, oil paints, classical styles, modern art, impressionists, the whole range. You're going to find that there in Baghdad. And so I created the character of Rania, an artist who is down on her luck, who was a childhood friend of Huda's, and they've become estranged due to events I won't go into because spoiler alert. And that allowed me to explore that side of life that for me was a real blessing. There wasn't, many avenues for me to go out and meet people outside of the workplace in Baghdad, mainly because the secret police were always watching. My friends didn't want to be seen with me in public in general because it might attract the attention of the secret police, and that's something that no one wants. But when I visited art galleries, I had a reason to be there, a reason to talk with artists, meet with artists without necessarily drawing the attention of the secret police. And, throughout, millennia, artists have been a conduit between the outside world and the inside world of Baghdad. And to an extent, they still played that role. And they had a little bit more freedom to associate with foreigners, but in a way, they also were walking a bit of a tightrope between not attracting suspicion, but still getting their art out there, including to the small foreign community. So the character of Rania gives you a little bit more insight into that wonderful aspect of Iraqi society. And when we meet Rania, it's at one of my all-time favorite places in Baghdad, and that is Mutanabi Book Market. This is an amazing spot. If you're a book lover, you would be just blown away. It's in a old part of the city in an Ottoman era walking street. You can see beautiful engraved Qurans, rare books of all sorts. But then you can also see, secondhand paperbacks, hardcovers, magazines in multiple languages. This was a place that I went frequently on the weekend. It was a big hangout for writers, for philosophers, for artists, and just a wonderful, wonderful experience. And when we meet Rania, she's actually in a shop that I created in the book that looks very similar to this. These little bookstores were in the alleys off Mutanabi Walking Street. And when you went in there, you could smell the old pages, you could smell the ink. It was just an amazing part of town. And I really loved being able to bring that to life. So that's two of the characters, Huda and Rania. And the third character who appears in the novel is the Western character of Ali, the new diplomat's wife. And people often assume that I am Ali and that Ali is me. And, we have some similarities, but we also have some big differences. In the book, Ali is a former journalist, and she also has to conceal her past job in order to enter the country. She enters the country using a visa category that has the most terrible name. It's called the dependent spouse visa. And that is actually the same visa that I used when I entered Iraq. And at the beginning of my stay in Baghdad, I felt, some of the isolation and the loneliness that Ali feels. But, unlike Ali, I very soon went out and got myself a part-time job working for the Oil for Food program with the United Nations. And another big difference between me and Ali is that I knew from the very beginning that I was under surveillance. Before we went into Baghdad, my husband and I were given a security briefing by the UN, and we were told to assume definitely the office would be bugged, to assume our house was bugged, that our phone was bugged, and we were told, if you ever want to have a conversation and you don't want the authorities to hear it, then go for a walk outside, because when you're outside, there's no power source for a microphone. So, we really got our steps in Baghdad, that's for sure. Not that I or he had, neither of us had any secrets that they were hiding, but occasionally you want to have a private conversation. So, we did practice, I guess, self-censorship in our own lives. And that's something that I wanted to convey throughout the book, that feeling of having to watch what you said all the time, what you said around other people and even in your own home. And Ali often looks out her window at a billboard across the street that shows Saddam Hussein. And I modeled that on the real billboard that was outside my house. And she often feels like he's staring at her and she's staring at him. They're in a sort of a staring competition, I guess. But, at that time, there was a saying that there were 5 million statues and paintings and murals of Saddam Hussein throughout Baghdad, one to watch over each of the 5 million people in Baghdad. And it definitely, did feel like that. And so I would say the biggest difference between me and Ali is that I did not go around poking into sensitive issues while Saddam Hussein was in power, because I knew that I was being watched. I didn't know that it was by one of my closest friends, but I knew that, I wasn't unnoticed. I couldn't just slip in and out of places and not be detected. And although I had some protections because I was connected to the United Nations, any of my local friends who were involved in that, that would have been a real danger for them. So that's some of the big differences between me and Ali. And here you can see some of the photos that I took of murals of Saddam Hussein after the war. I also wasn't allowed to carry a camera around in Baghdad during the war. So all my photos are from after that period. So you can see some graffiti there. So there's a fourth character, in my opinion, in the book, and that is Baghdad itself. And a lot of people know about the ancient history of Baghdad. It's often called the cradle of civilization. That area between the Tigris River and the Euphrates, the Tigris runs through Baghdad, is the Fertile Crescent. That's where the wheel was invented, the first legal system, the first written language, the first plow, so many contributions to society as a whole came out of that part of the world. But I wanted to look at a more recent period in Iraq's history, which is very, very dear to many Iraqis. And that is the period called the Golden Years. This is the late 60s and the early 1970s. And one of the secrets that Ali is hiding is that her mother was a nurse working in Baghdad during that time. During the period of the Golden Years, there were a lot of tourists visiting Baghdad from all over the world. There were a lot of expats, people in the oil industry from America. A lot of women came and worked as teachers and nurses. And Ali's mum is one of those. And she's also an American. So Ali is hiding the fact that she also has American citizenship, because if there's one thing Saddam Hussein did not want in Baghdad more than journalists, it was definitely Americans, and that would have put anybody at risk in that period, being an American in Baghdad. But I wanted to look back at this time. It was such a dear memory to many of my Iraqi friends. There were cafes along the Tigris River, there were restaurants, there were even casinos. One of my friends told me a story about how he used to go water skiing on the Tigris, and they often hark back to that time because I guess it had changed so dramatically by the time I got there. Saddam had these huge palaces built on the river and nobody went to the riverside anymore. So looking back on that nostalgia of Baghdad at the past is something I also wanted to get into. And here's a little bit about how I turned fact into fiction. I took this photo after the war, as I mentioned, just around the corner from Mutanabi Market. This is two little girls. They're getting ready to go to their auntie's wedding. And I used this often when I was looking for inspiration, when looking back at the childhood relationship between Huda and Rania. Rania is older and a bit more sophisticated, came from a much more wealthy background. Huda is a bit more reserved and shy. So I looked at my own photos for inspiration. And like any novelist, I went down the rabbit hole with my research. Here you can see a cup of coffee. My Iraqi friends often volunteered to read my fortune in the grounds of the coffee cup. And Huda is descended from a famous fortune teller. So she quite often reads the fortune of Ali, especially in the coffee cup. So the research I did there, I actually studied what the various squiggles meant so I could inject that into the book. Here you can see a postcard of the sort that Ali's mum might have sent when she was in Baghdad. Ali has a cache of old postcards that she consults. And here I've got some bird bones. I wrote a scene where Huda has collected some runes, some make-believe runes, some bird bones, a couple of coins, some stones, and she keeps them in a little bag. And her and Rania quite often get together and they cast the stones and they try and predict their own futures in the runes. So that's some of the sort of research that I did. And I also relied on my Iraqi friends a lot to help me with the fact checking and to make sure I got the details right. That was very important to me. But, they also helped me in another way, and that is also by providing inspiration. My Iraqi friends, especially my female Iraqi friends, were so inspiring, such resilient women. They had been through so much over the years and they never gave up. No matter what happened, they didn't get bitter. They didn't turn cynical. And to me, I found them to be a huge source of support when things got tough in Baghdad and a huge source of inspiration. And I hope that comes through in the book. I really tried to show that we have a lot, in common. I think a lot of women in the West are going to see similarities between the lives of the Iraqi characters. Huda is always going on diets and falling off the diet bandwagon, which I can relate to. Her and Rania are both dealing with rebellious teenagers. And Huda is also struggling to juggle her work and her home responsibilities. So I think these are things that everyone can relate to. And, you know, at this time when we seem so divided in so many ways, you know, I really hope that this is an opportunity to, you know, get inside someone else's head. And that's the great thing about fiction, about novels. You can be transported into somebody else's life. You can walk in someone else's footsteps and you can think, you know, what would I have done in that situation? And get the chance to, you know, experience and meet people that you might not normally have in your everyday life. And I feel now, you know, that fiction is more important than ever in terms of bringing us together. And speaking of bringing us together, thank you again to the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. If you want to stay in contact, I'm at ginawilkinson.net. You can also find me on Instagram. And that's about all I have to say. So thank you so much. Back to you, Wiley.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Gina. That was fantastic. It really does a great job of putting us in the book for those of us who haven't read it. And you're right, you know, this novel has 3 very strong female lead characters, but the city of Baghdad is a character unto itself. And we've got some questions already lined up for you, but I've got a question. So I've got kind of a 2-part question. Your background's in journalism, and in 2007, you published a memoir about your time in Iraq. And I'm wondering, and I saw your quote before you introduced one of the characters that talked about the role of fiction is sometimes to tell the truer story. And I'm wondering about your skills and experience as a journalist. You talked about kind of interviewing people and friends and kind of networking out to find information. But how did your experiences as a journalist allow you to write fiction? And how did your fiction allow you to write what may end up being a truer story of the experience than straight nonfiction might be?
Yeah, you know, there were definitely pros and cons in terms of my journalistic background. You know, journalism is great in terms of giving me the skills to research, knowing where to go to find out information, and getting the small details right, which are so important, I think, when you're writing a novel. It also gave me the opportunity to go places and meet people that I would not normally have been able to meet. But on the other hand, you know, sometimes my training as a journalist was, I had to sort of retrain myself. Sometimes I try and put in an event from real life, and real life is so much more messy than fiction. You know, especially under extreme circumstances, people can do things that are completely out of character. Someone who's normally quite meek can become very courageous. Someone who is usually a very ethical person can suddenly make a huge mistake. But in a novel, you can't really have your characters do random, unexplained events. You've got to lay clues beforehand, at least hide clues beforehand. And, you know, I personally found sometimes I think, oh, you know, I'm going to put this event from my real life in there. And when I put it in, I think, you know what, nobody is going to believe that actually happened. So I had to sort of retrain myself to think outside of my own personal experience and think, well, what else might happen in this situation, and also to be true to a larger, you know, to reflect a larger truth. And you know, for me, I feel like here I got to answer some of the questions that perhaps I wasn't brave enough to ask at the time, or get some of the answers that I didn't get at the time. So, you know, it was definitely a pro and con situation, my journalistic background.
Well, speaking of questions you might not gotten to answer at the time, some readers have some questions about those very questions. So the first question comes from Susan, and she asks, how did you find out this woman worked for the government, and did she confide in you while she was still supposed to be working for them, and were you scared?
Yeah, you know, I suspected something was up. mainly because she had absolutely no problem about being seen with me in public, inviting me around to her house, and none of my other friends did that. And in fact, some of them apologized to me at the time saying, you know, I really wish I could have you over to my house, because hospitality is a huge part of Iraqi life. But they explained, if I do that, I'm going to get a visit from the secret police, and you know, it's just too risky. So I was sort of suspicious, and I confided in a few of my foreign friends my suspicions, and they all said, oh, you're being paranoid. But after the fall of Saddam Hussein, the other Iraqis in her workplace outed her and the other secret police informants. So, you know, and she actually ended up losing her job, and she came to me to ask me if I could help her find a new job. I knew her boss, so I went and saw him, and I said, what is going on? Like, I don't understand why you'd let her go now. And he said, well, unfortunately, we had to. You know, at that time, you know, I think there was a lot of emotion among Iraqis about people who had, you know, cooperated with the regime. I think a lot of people had to answer questions, but there was another level higher up where you were more of an active informant. And, you know, I think it's changed since then. I know she's been hired back because I think Iraqi society had to sort of reconcile how, you know, and come to also understand how people might make those decisions, and perhaps feel a bit more compassionate about people who did cooperate with the regime, and look at the reasons why they may have had to have made those choices. But, you know, I guess she never came clean with me. I did arrange twice to meet with her to have a conversation and just to say to her, you know, I don't blame you. I know that she was upset with me because I didn't manage to find her a job, but that was not possible at that time to find people who had been working as informants work. And, you know, both times things got in the way. In one case, it was a couple of years later, and I told my other Iraqi friends, I'm going to go see her, and, you know, I want to, you know, have some resolution in this friendship. And they actually asked me not to, because they said under Saddam Hussein, the Iraqis knew who was working for who, but after he was ousted, there was a power vacuum, many different militias operating, and they didn't know who was working for who. And they said, if she knows, you know, they're going to know we know, and then, you know, that could potentially be a threat to us. It was a very, very violent time at that period. One of my friends' fathers had just been kidnapped and tortured. Another one of my friend's brothers had been murdered. And so, you know, I didn't really feel that my personal desire to resolve that situation was worth making my Iraqi friends stress more than they already were. So, you know, I guess in this novel, I'm sort of trying to answer some of those questions that I didn't get to resolve, because, yeah, real life is much more messy and unresolved than fiction.
And what years were y'all in Baghdad?
2002 and 2003.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So the last year of the Saddam Hussein regime and the first year of the American presence.
Wow. We have a question from Jane. Her bookstore is Story and Song in Northeast Florida. I'm not sure. Love the book. I love the history and culture and the real women and their friendship. Can you explain about the apricot theme?
Oh, yeah. When the apricots bloom is actually an Arabic saying. It is means, you know, a very fleeting opportunity, or an opportunity that is very difficult to grasp. It's in a way a much more graceful way of saying when pigs fly, but the Arabic language is way more beautiful than that. But yeah, it's like a fleeting opportunity, a momentary opportunity, and it's something that Huda's minder with the secret police says to her. She's trying to get more time before she has to deliver information to him, and he says, well, you know, if it was a different, you know, circumstances, we could wait until the apricots bloom. Like, you know, that's one of the lines he uses with her. And so that's why I went with that for the title of the book. It came from that conversation. And also there were a lot of fruit trees in various backgrounds and various backyards, and it just seemed like a local flavor.
It's a great title. I butchered the name of where the bookstore is. It's in Fernandina Beach, Florida. We have a question from Lisa, page 158, books in Wake Forest. She said, given the opportunity, would you go back to visit or live in Baghdad now, especially given your connection to the area and your appreciation for the art and these relationships you've made?
Yeah, I would love to go back to Baghdad if it was safe enough to go there. Unfortunately, the security situation is still very, very poor. But, I really hope that there is a day when Iraq can have its new golden years, because it's such an awesome place to visit. And, it's got a beautiful river running through the city, so much heritage, so many historic sites. And for book lovers, I think Mushanabi Market would have to be like the #1 on so many itineraries. Just a mind. I've been to a lot of book markets throughout the world, and that for me is the #1. I would go back there just for that. So I would love to go back. I'm still in contact with many of my Iraqi friends, and I would love to be able to get together with them again. That would be fantastic.
Well, I have one last question for you. This question comes from Vita, and she asks, who is your favorite character in the book? Actually, it says Heather. Who is your favorite character? And I would ask you, you said, there's the suspicion that maybe you're Ali or Ali is you. Which character resonated with you the most?
Yeah, I would say Huda is my favorite character. She has the biggest moral issues, I guess, to grapple with. I really enjoyed getting into her mind. So for me, she is the chief protagonist. Other people, have their favorite characters, but for me, I think Huda was the most interesting, and I got to explore that theme of what do people do under extreme circumstances, how do they behave, what are the choices that they make, and look at the fact that we are all flawed as human beings. I worked in a lot of war zones, and from my own experience, I know how easy it is to make mistakes under pressure. And so I really wanted to explore those issues of how do you stay true to yourself? If you fall down, how do you get up again? And the character of Huda really enabled me to do that.
Well, thank you so much. That's a great way to, a great message to go out on, given the content of the book and the theme and everything. So thank you so much for joining us, Gina. You have the whole afternoon ahead of you now, joining us from Australia. And here on the East Coast, we're winding things down. Another edition of SIVA's Reader Meet Writer. Go out tonight, order Gina's wonderful book from the independent bookstore that brought you here tonight. And please join us on Tuesday, March 30th for Mary Lawson's A Town Called Solace at 7 p.m. And then Thursday, April 1st for Denny S. Bryce's new novel, Wild Women and the Blues, Thursday, April 1st at 7 p.m. And until then, have a great rest of your month. And Gina, again, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Wiley. Thank you so much. It was lovely to be here, and thanks to SIVA. Awesome to have such great support from independent booksellers. They are so vital to our communities. Thank you. I really appreciate it.